Hey, I'm going to do a little adjusting of this camera quick. There. I swear most of when I'm getting ready to do these live, I'm always trying to figure out where to sit or kind of what to do with everything. So, well, I see some people are joining. That's so exciting. Hi, everybody. Make sure to tell me when you guys are joining in. And I'm going to just kind of talk along, and when I see that people are asking questions, I'm going to kind of answer them in between everything. So, I am a licensed funeral director. I have been for about 15 years. Hopefully you guys can hear me. If you can't, make sure to say something also. Last time I wore I think a head thing which had a little microphone, so it made it easier. So I've taken my licensed funeral directing and I do freelance with it. I've been the on-site director at a few funeral homes as well. Yes, I love my work. I love what I do. And so I do freelance, I go fill in, I do some trade embalming, I cover funerals, I do some OSHA, like in helping a funeral home get up to code for OSHA, and I do funeral business coaching to help funeral homes get better levels of customer experience for the families that they serve, which will increase profit, which is huge. I've got a published article within the business. I'm doing some speaking engagements, so I feel like I'm a little all over the place right now. But I've been getting a lot of questions and a lot of things thrown at me from people interested in the business and people that want to know more about how to get into the business and what the business is like, and so I found that doing this helps those people kind of direct what they're doing. Make sure. I don't know what Periscope is. I guess I'm going to have to look into that because I have no idea what that platform is. I do get sad sometimes. It just really depends on the situation and the involvement, and I would say it probably shock most people the funerals that make me the saddest, because it's oftentimes like the 90-year-old couple that have been married for 70 plus years and they're having to live life without each other, and you know, rather than that may affect me more than maybe a baby funeral. It really depends on how much I've connected with the family, how much I can distance myself from the emotions. So it really just depends how sad I guess I get from different funerals. So I got into the business, well, I think like most people, not most people, but a lot of people, where they started working in high school or when they were younger around the funeral home. I know a lot of funeral directors who started by cutting the grass or washing cars at the funeral home after school, and I did it as a part-time job in the evenings and on weekends, answering the phones and directing people at visitations where the register book is, you know, point them to the register book. And so yes, I go to the services. I run the services. So the services, excuse me, I'm going to raise myself up a little. Yes, I run the services and take care of all of it. So I do every aspect of the funeral business. I do. So through high school, I worked at a funeral home, and you know, I got a lot of the, what, you work at a funeral home, and all the crazy jokes and stuff, and it just never really fazed me, didn't take it personally. It was more like, oh, well, I'm going to be different, and that's just who I am. How long does it take for a body to be cremated? So the cremation itself in the retort, which is the machine, like I would say 2 hours is a good average. An hour for to for the actual process, and then you have to wait for the body to cool after that to remove the cremated remains from the crematory. So I then went from high school, I went to a 4-year liberal arts college and got my bachelor's degree in psychology. And during that time, I realized that I wanted to be a funeral director, or at least try it. And so I tried my apprenticeship, which you have to do. So it's a trade type job where you do an apprenticeship. And then I went to mortuary school. So I did my 4 years, and then I went to mortuary school, and I chose Cincinnati just out of location. Yeah, just check around your area for jobs within the business. There's so many different jobs within a funeral home, especially a larger funeral home. You can do, just running errands, washing cars, cleaning up, working visitations, working in the office. There's all sorts of positions now with, the graphics team or scanning photos or working luncheons, things like that. So just approach funeral homes in your area or in a nearby larger city that may have more opportunity, and kind of get in there. And once you're in the funeral home working a little bit, you see more of what there is to do in the funeral home, because so much of it is behind the scenes that you don't even realize it's there or that it's an opportunity. Well, and you might be surprised. So working in the business, it's, you don't go to a funeral home typically unless you're emotionally tied to why you're there. So for you to work at a funeral home, you're not actually having lost somebody. You don't go to work every day sad because you haven't lost anybody. You're taking care of somebody. So it's a totally different mindset. So thinking about working in a funeral home, you think about it from your mindset of having been there, having had a loss. So it's a totally different thing when you're going there and there's nobody there that you've lost. So it's hard to imagine working there when you can't disconnect and look at it from the other place. You do, but you also get a lot back from being able to help a family. So there's more reward than there is sadness on most days for you. So I did my apprenticeship, and it was 6 months because I had a bachelor's degree. And then I went to mortuary school in Cincinnati, and I chose there because I didn't want to go to Wayne State. I didn't want to go to Worsham and Chicago, and I live in Michigan, so wanted something within a decent proximity. So I went to Cincinnati, and it was a great choice for me. I loved the city. I loved just kind of the layout of it. It was a big city, but it was not all compact big city. It had all these little suburbs. Of course, when I was there, there were race riots and curfews and all this crazy stuff going on. So that was interesting to be in the city for. I had never, growing up in a uber small town, I didn't have diversity, and I would have never imagined running into that kind of stuff at anywhere. So that was a really interesting experience while I was there. Yeah, there's, female funeral directors. So like my mortuary class had about 30% females, and now the ratio is almost to where it's not even just 50-50. It's almost more females than males at mortuary school. But the dropout rate after a few years is more for females, because females then go on to get married, have kids, and once you factor all that in, sometimes that timing with the kids doesn't balance out. It's harder with the on-call schedule and working, long hours and going out in the middle of the night and things just doesn't always balance with, I think, the women's role within a family, and often, taking care of the kids and stuff, which sounds a little archaic, but it's just kind of how it is. So a lot of women back away from the business or go into a different avenue. I know a good number of people that I graduated mortuary school with aren't in the business anymore. They work in other vocations, other avenues, other types of business that they just decided it wasn't for them. A lot of people that go to mortuary school, I won't say a lot. So people are there from every level of interest in the business, from never having set foot in a funeral home to having grown up in a funeral home and watched embalming since they were, little kids. And so there's the whole span of, type of experience. So, there's people that will blatantly tell you, I wanted a quick college, I wanted something I could do, and it's a 1-year program, so I can be in and out in a year. Once your prerequisites are done, it's a year. So it's about 2 years of prereqs, 1 year of college, and then you have your degree, and you just have to get your license with your apprenticeship and with your boards. So a lot of people will, I keep saying a lot of people, and it's not a lot, but a good number of people will blatantly tell you, I saw that it was a year. Seems like you got to make a lot of money since you drive black Cadillacs and, these fancy cars. So it seemed like a good place. And some of these people have never even seen a dead body. They have never been in a funeral home. They have no idea the hours involved, the actual what it is that you do at a funeral home. And so within a couple weeks, they typically drop out of school because of the embalming and just learning more about the business, and it's just not for them. So there was a question about removals, or when we go to bring the person into our care, and typically if it is a house call and we're going to a home, or if the family is going to be there, typically 2 people will go. If you're going to a facility like a hospital or a nursing home, typically it just depends, but most of the time 1 person will go, because there's staff around that will help moving the individual onto the cot and some of that. So 2 or 1, sometimes 3 or 4 if we know the person is a lot heavier. So those are definitely aspects that are factored in too. So when I got done with mortuary school, it was a 1-year program. So let's talk about that. So it was a 1-year program broken up into 4 quarters. And they're pretty intense quarters. And you're studying subjects from all across the board, because you have to know a little bit about a lot of areas. So chemistry, anatomy, accounting, psychology, public speaking, restorative art, mortuary law. I'm trying to think of other ones that we do. English, do role-playing classes, embalming classes. I think I said chemistry. I'm trying to think of other ones that we did. It's been a few years since I was at mortuary school. But you get this huge education in all these different areas. Like the final exam in our embalming class, the 1 quarter, we were given 2 lines, and it was essentially, if you put a drop, if you start a drop of blood here and it ends here, trace it through your body, and you had to name every artery and every vein that it went through in your body to get from point A to point B. And so you have to know all those components of a body to be able to embalm. Most people after mortuary school, just like I think a lot of education, you're never going to have to know the name of some of this stuff ever again, but you learn it to know it, and it helps you to be educated, and just in case you ever need to know it, but most of the time you don't need to. But you do learn a lot of things. You learn a lot of how things can go wrong when you're embalming, and different situations you may run into with jaundice bodies, or if there's a lot of edema or different fluids, or how to embalm children and babies and accident victims and things all over the board. Hold on 1 sec. So I just missed the one chat that popped up. I'm going to try and pull up on my phone. They disappear when they're on I've got my iPad going, and they disappear on there. Too fast for me to have answered that one. So, so mortuary school, yeah, you're all over the place with what you're learning and what you're doing, and the nice thing is that you're with like-minded people. You're with people that are in the business, that are wanting the same things that you are, and so you don't have to worry about people judging you, judging kind of your jokes if they're maybe not as tactful as, you know, a third person may think they should be, or if you're just being you, and so you don't get judged for just being you, which is nice. Okay, if the state pays for someone's cremation, would the family have to pay anything? Tell me a little more about that question, Darnell. So I'm assuming like if you got help from DHS or FIA or something, if the family has to pay something. Is that what you're asking? But so mortuary school was great. I got to learn a lot just from different people across the country, across the world, because we had people from other countries there even as well. So that was a really neat experience to get so much diversity just within the pool of funeral directors that we were learning with. And we did great role-playing different situations, different families that you're going to deal with. You know, every family is by far different that you deal with, which is why I love the business, because you run into just about every type of a situation, but you can role play a lot of them kind of in general, so that when you do deal with maybe divorced parents of a child, what are some things that maybe you really need to do with those parents, or to look for when you're taking care of those parents to make it easier since they are divorced and you've got two sets of families, and just not creating a divide. So that's one thing that, you know, we did was role play, which was really helpful. I'm asked a lot what my favorite part of the business is, and I would say amazing moments with people, and or within funerals, or just these little moments that are just so heartwarming, I think, because of how lightened a heavy moment can be. And so getting to see these really cool, beautiful moments, and they might be heart-wrenching, but they're also beautiful at the same time. So like one, was doing a funeral for a little boy that had died, and he had a 3-year-old sister, and she used to sing him Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And so at the funeral, which I led, we had everybody together sing Twinkle Twinkle to this little baby, because the sister wasn't there. And it was just this really beautiful moment for the family and everything. It was just really cool, and it sounds like it sucks and it's heart-wrenching, but it was actually beautiful, and that family and I were very close and had just a great connection, and that was something that I knew was going to help them and support them. So moments like that. All right, so let me look at these. Have you noticed different generations' attitudes towards death, older generations versus younger? I think definitely. One thing that pops out when I read that question is that I really dislike working with the teen generation. So if there's a teen death, I'm always like, ugh. And it's because of teenagers, and somebody I'm sure going to bash me for saying this, but teenagers are a very selfish generation, and you don't see the bigger picture of things. So if there's a teenager that dies, I know that there's going to be a good number of people that showed up that really weren't friends with this person, that are just there to be part of the drama, that are there to post on Facebook that they attended the funeral so people can say, oh, I'm so sorry for you, even though you really didn't lose the person in your world, but you are trying to put on a show because of the death. And it just drives me nuts. I really dislike dealing with all of that. I've seen teenagers walk up to parents of a deceased and ask for their like bulletin to take home and to keep because they didn't get one or they lost one or something. You know, just totally oblivious to the fact that these parents are standing at a casket saying goodbye to their child, but them having a program was more important, so they're interrupting that moment. You know, they don't see that big picture. And so I think younger generations, they see it as another thing to be in drama with. So the teenagers, yeah, I could talk forever about that. I feel like there's definitely a change. If you want to just look at generations in terms of, you know, you look at the older 80, 90-year-olds right now, are far more traditional with what their services were, and we're now becoming a very cremation-driven society. We're in the baby boomers kind of want everything however they want it, and it's one up the Joneses, and well, they did a Dove release, well, we need to do this, or we need to have a keg at ours because of whatever, you know, just trying to outdo each other and trying to have something bigger, better. And definitely, I don't know if it's generational, you know, it could be, because it's about every 20 years that the business really gets an upheaval and changes. So I definitely, it's changing. And if you look at cemeteries, you know, I would say 60 and up generations are the ones that tend to cemeteries. They go out for Memorial Day and take care of cemeteries, whereas 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, how many of them have ever gone and taken care of a cemetery? And I'm sure there are some, but they don't visit cemeteries, and it's not a place of honor and remembrance like it was in the older generations, because everybody was buried at that point. Now, this whole cremation has changed that there's not the place that you go to. You don't go tend to a grave because there is no grave. So that, I think, has changed over the generations as well. And so 20 years from now, I don't even know what it's going to look like. I can't even imagine, because things change so much just every few years. So, read the next question here. Yeah, bringing home a lot of stress. There's, you know, I think all of that emotion, even if you can turn off the sad impact it has on you, there's definitely comes out in other areas where there's some days I may be angry, there's some days I may be just sad or not even know. It's just that misplaced, I guess, emotion where it's got to go somewhere. You know, there's days where I'll get in the car and I'll just cry, have a good cry for 5 minutes, and then I'm done and I'm good. Sometimes as soon as a big funeral is over, if it was one that there was a lot of anticipation and adrenaline going for, as soon as it's done and as soon as the place is empty and I'm back to my desk, I just like sit down my head and cry for a few minutes, because it's just this release of all the built up anticipation and everything leading into it. So definitely there's stress and anxiety and things that build up because of it. And the funeral home in Detroit said they have to pay is too, and I'm not really sure what for. Yes, so, okay, I can only talk from Michigan because that's where I'm most familiar with how the state helps. So what happens is, if a family does, well, first of all, a funeral home has to accept state aid as a form of payment. And a lot of them don't accept that anymore because you're barely given enough money. So like for a cremation, you're barely given enough to even cover anything. The crematory has to still be paid. your employees still have to be paid, everybody still has to be paid, and you're given just such a small amount of money. So the state says, okay, as long as the family pays the difference up to a certain amount, then the state will give you however much. And it's like very, very, very minimal. So the family has to pay the difference of whatever it is that the state says. And so whatever that family has chosen, they're going to have to pay the difference of what the funeral bill is minus what the state paid. They do have to pay the difference. And it can't be, they can't have a state funeral and then also go and pay for all this other stuff on the side. Like a state funeral is laid out. You have this kind of casket, you have this kind of vault, you have this restrictions. It's very limited because you can't get a certain type of funeral, or you can't want the state to pay for it, but want this other type of a funeral. So it's very restricted and very limited. So they've talked many times about just doing away with state aid because it is such a nominal, it's kind of a joke where it's at right now because it's such a small amount of money that the state will give for any funeral, burial, cremation, anything, that it doesn't really pay for anything. It doesn't help the funeral home really cover anything. The family has to jump through a huge amount of hoops, and then they still have to come up with some money. So it's not a good situation for anyone really in that aspect. But when somebody has nothing, a little bit of help helps. So it all, that kind of also is part of it. Let's see. So I talked about some favorite parts. So amazing moments. Doing some restorative art, when there's maybe a cancer is eating away part of a jaw or a throat, or someone loses an ear in an accident, or, just something that's been destructive to the person that died. It's really awesome to get to restore that for a family and to get to give back something, kind of take away the pain of the death, so to speak, for that final goodbye for the family. So that's always awesome to get to do. We see a lot of healing firsthand, a lot of getting people on the right road. Grief has a delayed. There's people that are at the arrangements or at visitation talking about how they're in grief. Well, grief doesn't start for a good 2 weeks after, 1 to 2 weeks after a funeral actually happens, because you're in too much of a fog. You cannot mentally, physically process what is happening until that fog lifts, and it takes a good 1 to 2 weeks. So you haven't even started your grieving until a few weeks later, when life actually starts back up and you're stuck in this paralysis from what's happened to you. So that getting to see that you're putting people on the right path for when they do start that grieving, and then eventually hopefully healing, is an awesome thing to get to do. It's awesome to be part of that with them and to know that you can do that for someone, and you can give that gift, and you can help put people where they need to be, because people don't know where they need to be. Until you've lost somebody, you can't know what loss is. It's not possible because you haven't done it yourself, and it always drives me nuts when you have people that try and tell other people how they're feeling or how you've been through it, because unless you've lost the same person in your own life, and I mean, like, if I lose my dad, unless you're me losing my dad, you don't know what I'm feeling, you don't know what I'm thinking, you don't know what it's going on with me. So for me to go to anybody else who's lost their dad and say, oh, I know exactly what you're feeling because I lost my dad. It's not. You are never on the same playing field. You never know what that is, because you are not that person. And I have watched, 70-year-old women who lost their 40-year-old son try and tell a 25-year-old mother who lost her 2-year-old son that they know what they're feeling. And that's not even the same ballpark. Just because it's a child, there's no other similarity. So that is hard to watch sometimes, because those words hurt that person and they're not meant to hurt, but they do. So that's always a frustrating situation. I would say some other negatives. Being on call is hard. It's, affects your family. Your family is basically in your career, and whether they want to be or not, they're kind of pulled into the lifestyle of being a funeral director, because depending on what funeral home you work for and how your on-call schedule is set up, or your rotation, or you could be taking call at night, where when a death call comes in, they call you every time. So if you work for a busy place, you could be up 6 times a night taking the calls and having to get things lined up, or calling a family or whatever. So that in itself can get super busy. Or, you're on call for a holiday, so you're in the middle of opening presents with your kids and you've got to take a death call. Or you're out to dinner for your anniversary and you take a death call. My husband and I were out to dinner for our 5-year anniversary, and I had to excuse myself for 20 minutes to go talk to a gentleman whose wife died. But I can go back to my spouse, and that guy can't. So, it's just having the right mindset too about all of that. Knowing where priorities are and knowing who and what needs to be taken care of in the moment is good. It's all perspective. So, let's see. So after mortuary school, you do your board. So you have to take a national board and a state board. So the national board is broken into 2 sections. One's kind of arts and one's science, more or less, seemingly. And so you have to pass both, and then you have to pass your state board as well to get your license to practice. And I know people who take the boards several times, and I thought the state board was really hard because it was laws that you don't even know. They don't teach in driver's education that you are not allowed to interfere with a funeral procession, or else you get a ticket. So if you try to get in the middle of a funeral procession, you get a ticket if you're reported. But they don't teach that. They don't teach that, processions can go through stoplights and you need to give them the right of way. They don't teach that. So there's things that the general public doesn't know about what our laws are. Or like in Michigan, you can only have 2 flags on the lead vehicle. But how many funeral homes have 2 flags on the hearse, which is often the second vehicle, and 2 flags on the lead? So there's little law things that are written in there, but who's enforcing them? Nobody. Who do they hurt? Nobody. So there's just a lot of different things in that aspect. So, what other questions do you guys have? I'm sure these are not all of them. I think a lot of people that get into the business get into it because they've had a loss. They've experienced something good and helpful and at a funeral home, or they worked with a good funeral director, or they just had a good experience during their own time of pain, and so they wanted to go into the business. Just like I think there's a good number of doctors who grew up and had a great doctor role model, or had somebody that really affected their life, I think, or teacher, or anything where you had somebody that maybe mentored you or gave you a good feel-good moment in your life, and so you want to go in that business because of it. And I've talked to a lot of people that's kind of the case, is they had a loss or they had an interaction with somebody at a funeral home, and so that is what led them down the path to being a funeral director. And a lot of those people, as long as you have the passion and the drive and the will to want to do it, you can do it and you can succeed, because you can't just go into this job as a job. It goes home with you. It is a life commitment. And so it's not something that you can go and just punch the clock and leave. It's not a 9-to-5 type job. You know, it's on call on the weekends or nights, and you know, you may not have to go out at night. It just depends on the funeral home. Funeral homes are all set up different with their schedule and their staffing, and some of them really got it going on, and they've got it laid out beautifully that they want to make sure that their staff has a life outside of the work, and that they have a good, balanced, rounded family life with work life. But there's some that don't recognize it at all, and you've got funeral directors working 16-hour days and being on call for 10 days in a row, and just they don't get a break. They don't have that balance between it. And so, you know, you've got to find the right place for you to work, the right situation, the right coworkers, because if you're working at a great funeral home but the staff is not clicking with you, it doesn't work either, because you have to be able to rely on who you're working with in the funeral home, especially in an emotional funeral or a high-profile funeral, or one that it really is all about you depending on the other staff and the other people around you. You have to click with that other staff. How long does it take for a body to start decomposing after embalming? So this is a number one question type thing that I do get asked that a lot. So I wish there was a set answer, but there's not. A body begins decomposing the minute someone dies, the moment someone dies. Embalming will hinder but not stop decomposition. Decomposition is going to happen no matter what. Now, a lot comes into play, and so there's no set formula, but if the person is obese, or if there were extenuating circumstances to their death, maybe an accident, things like that, or they're a tissue or bone donor, or just anything that maybe hinders the embalming process to where fluid distribution is not going to get to everywhere the best that it can, then definitely the process is going to be sped up when it comes to decomposition. I do know people, though, that have done disinterments of a body after 15 years, and the person looks decent. But I also know after a year, disinterments that have happened, and the person was completely decomposed. And you know, when someone decomposes, they can go one of two ways. They can kind of mummify, where their body dries out, or they can liquefy, where essentially they turn into liquid. And what happens in a casket is almost like a greenhouse effect. So the person kind of liquefies down. That moisture then evaporates up into the top of the casket and then rains back down. And it keeps, you know, in that closed environment, that process continues over and over and over. And so that also decomposes that body a little bit faster too. So there's kind of just different situations with how that body is going to decompose depending on the body. So, and there's so many new factors, you know, new administration of drugs, you know, chemo, all sorts of things that do damage to the body before the body actually has died. And so that all comes into play as well. So I wish there was a set answer for that, but there's not. There's just really not. So, but I do get that question a lot. Let me see. There was Okay, so Tiffany, awesome that you're going to mortuary school. Congratulations. Where are you headed off to? You'll have to let me know. So the thing about moving people around, which as I'm saying that I have to just adjust, so hold on one second. The only thing about that is that, oh, awesome. I know somebody just graduated from there, so, and they had a great experience. A lot of culture down there that you can learn from different funeral homes. So you learn about leverage when it comes to moving people, and how to use your own strength to maneuver individuals. When you go on removals, things like that, like I had said earlier, you're going to go with 2 people if it's to a home, things of that nature. Don't ever be so full of pride that you do not ask for help. That is the biggest thing. I think anybody, whether it's a guy or a girl or anybody, is always asking for help. If you don't think you can lift somebody or lift the cot or you know, do something, always ask for assistance. Families are, a lot of times, they don't want you to drop their loved one or, you know, even it be an issue. So they'll be happy to help, or people at a hospital, just ask for help. So that's, you know, not going to be a problem. But dressing bodies you'll often do by yourself, and you will learn how to maneuver, how to use the legs to help you turn the rest of the body, and you learn that stuff. I spent the first, I don't even know how many months that I was dressing people, and I would always call for assistance. And the one director finally said, Kari, you got to learn how to do this on your own, because there's not always going to be somebody around. So I had to learn how to do different things, how to, you know, how to hook a bra without rolling the body fully around, and just how to do things on my own. So you develop upper strength that you didn't, you know, have before, and you definitely are going to learn how to maneuver some things around so that you can handle the body the best way that you can. But tell people to screw off, you know. You'll do great. It doesn't matter your size. It doesn't matter that you're a female. You know, none of that matters, because you're the one wanting to go do it, and just do it. I think that's awesome. So what other questions do you guys have? Thank you. I was trying to think. Hold on one sec. Again, I'm adjusting a lot today. My legs are going to sleep or whatever. I did a video earlier on high-profile funerals, so I'll be posting that later. That was kind of fun to... I say fun, and I feel like I'm going to be chastised for saying fun when I'm reflecting on, I guess, somebody else's loss, but that's not what I mean by it at all. And that's one of the hard things when you're in a format like this, where it's not just funeral directors, and you do have to worry about that negative response to what is not meant in a negative way. So that is definitely something different for me to have to consider, but it's also hard to watch your words all the time when you are trying to just be very honest about different situations. But it was reflecting on funerals that I've done, and people that I've touched, or that have touched me. It's I don't know. There's some I think back on, and they're just amazing moments that have really been awesome to be part of, and community moments. So had a funeral once for a young guy, and he died. I want to say he was 12, and had a huge funeral for him, and just a really cool funeral. It was in a gymnasium, and they did a lot of really cool things during the service, just stories they told about him, and the humor that the family brought to it, and to the lightheartedness, and it reflected on kind of how he was as a kid, and that was a cool thing to be a part of. I will say, so my favorite funerals, and I think I've talked about this before in some of my videos, but I love biker funerals. I love motorcycle funerals. There is very few things more amazing than a huge parking lot full of motorcycles. You know, we're talking 50 to 100, all starting up at the same time, and your whole core just vibrates from the engines all starting. It's pretty awesome, I will say that. Just some of the sights, driving down the road to a cemetery where you're going to bury a fireman, and the fire trucks and the ladders are crossed over the road with the flag hanging down, and you're driving beneath it with the deceased in the back, and it's just such a moment of pride, and you're really humbled because you're getting to give such an honor to a family and to a deceased. So some of those moments are just the best moments about what we do as funeral directors. There's a lot that suck. So, you know, we see the worst, absolute worst in humanity, what, you know, the other side of it, where, you know, if someone's raped and murdered, we see that person afterwards in all their, I don't know, I want to say dehumanized moment where they've been autopsied and they're, you know, battered, and just, it's sad. And you see that someone did this to them, and you know what their final, you don't know what they could have been like, but you're like, gosh, your final moments were horrible. And so you have to see that and be around that and know that, but then you get to take care of that person and wash their hair and brush their hair and give them a bath and get them dressed and put them at rest. And it's such a peaceful thing for you to get to do for them. So it's some of those moments that are just the most amazing to get to do. But you do see some really ugly things. I can only imagine what some funeral directors in certain areas that they live and at high volume funeral homes in certain areas, what they must see and deal with. And I can't imagine. You know, there's got to be just overwhelming what some of the funeral directors have to do. So, well, I'm waiting on any other questions. I'm going to just do a little plug here too. So because I've been asked so many questions by so many people going to mortuary school, I decided to start a Facebook group, monthly membership group for pre-mortuary, mortuary students, people interested in going in the business. I'll go live there once a week, talk on a different topic, things to learn and know about the business and situations, business side of stuff, embalming, all sorts of areas of the funeral home. And so we'll live weekly training, posts, you know, throughout the week, Zoom meeting once a month, just a community of like-minded people. So say if you're in mortuary school and you want to talk to somebody else from another mortuary school or trade books or whatever you want to do, it's just a good community that I'm facilitating that you can be part of to connect with other people in that same kind of phase of life and that same path that you're on. So I'm going to post a link for that if you're interested to read a little more about it and sign up for it if you want to. I'll post that below in the comments after the video is done. So I'm going to give you guys just one more chance to post a last question before I wrap it up. So, well, thank you guys for joining today, and if you have other questions, by all means, send them over to me or post below, and I will talk to you guys soon.